This is a scholarly paper presentation, which is a correlational study between the State of Texas Academic Assessment of Readiness and the Fontes-Pinnell Benchmark Assessment System. First of all, a little introduction. The A3F Accountability Rating System has recently gone into place in Texas. And Kane and Laird in 2011 said that we can no longer hide from achievement gaps. It's no longer okay for schools just to do things okay and get along. We must do a substantial number of things correctly. And also, Rose and Lash in 89 and 95 respectively pointed out that reading is the primary means that we use to become educated. We first learned how to read through third grade, and then after that we use reading as a means of educating ourselves through formal and informal educational methodologies. And according to Friedman in his book, The World is Flat, reading and writing is a 21st century skill. More specifically, he said what we need is advanced proficiency in plain old reading and writing to have good 21st century skills. We also need high-quality formative assessment. Black and Williams are their seminal research and formative assessment was done in 2009, and we've built on that since, but it was the seminal work on formative assessment, and their idea is that we need more reading formative assessment so we can better drive instruction. This is a correlational study between the Fontes-Pinnell Benchmark Assessment System and the State of Texas Academic Assessment of Readiness. First, a little background. The Fontes-Pinnell Benchmark Assessment System has been around for quite some time. It is the lifetime work of Irene Fontes and Gesu Pinnell, and it measures performance in grades K through 5 and beyond if your school goes that far. But Fontes-Pinnell was adopted and has been used for the last 2 years in Weatherford ISD, and they have a long history of effectiveness. Prior to this, there was not really any kind of formative assessment used in Weatherford ISD. At the present time, it's not known if a correlation exists between the Fontes-Pinnell Benchmark Assessment System and STAR. Fontes-Pinnell levels are used to determine the need for intervention enrichment in the current system in Weatherford ISD, and it basically puts students in text level complexity that they can handle and puts them, as Vygotsky says, in their zone of proximal development with appropriately complex levels of text. The theoretical framework used for this study is latent trait theory and item response theory, and to basically explain this, it's what is basically saying is what is known can be measured using an assessment. Linking is one way we do this, is where we take one test that measures, say, reading performance, and we try to link it to another test that measures reading performance as well. And the basic theory is that if we increase benchmark assessment scores, STAR scores should increase. And if we decrease benchmark assessment system scores, STAR scores would decrease in our student population. That's our theoretical framework. The statement of purpose is to examine if a statistically significant correlation exists between STAR and Fontes-Pinnell Benchmark Assessment System. Our research questions are pretty simple. To what extent is there a relationship between the scaled Lexile scores of the third grade reading State of Texas Assessment of Academic Readiness, STAR, and the Fontes-Pinnell Benchmark Assessment System in third grade? That's question number 1. Question number 2 is fourth grade. Question number 3 is fifth grade. The null hypothesis is there is no relationship between those two assessments. And the alternative hypothesis is there is some form of relationship, and to what degree are they related? The significance of this study is that educators are looking for assessments that can inform instruction. And FARA in 2010 determined that most assessments that are out there on the commercial market for reading have absolutely no research base. In fact, he stated that superintendents and school boards demand these commercial solutions even without any kind of research base that they are in fact effective. There's also some readability levels of STAR issues that are in question. Svabo and Sinclair in 2019 did a correlational study, and that study determined that grade levels were substantially off, up to 2 grade levels high in general. We'll talk about those results in a later slide. And also we need, it'd be helpful for instruction to find corresponding levels of the Fontes-Pinnell benchmark assessment system and the state of Texas academic assessment of readiness so that teachers could better prepare their students for the end of year summative assessment or STAR. There are some delimitations and limitations to our study. Number one, it's one suburban school district, Weatherford ISD. It's 1 year, 2018-19. Students had to take both the benchmark assessment system and the state of Texas academic assessment of readiness, and that is the benchmark assessment for end of year. And it's assumed that students work hard and teachers will adjust when given appropriate data to drive instruction. It's also assumed that teachers gave the benchmark assessment system properly as prescribed by Fontes-Pinnell in their training materials. Literacy in the United States has been a mixed bag. It started off with George W. Bush, then governor of the great state of Texas, and what he called the Texas Miracle. He put some high stakes accountability tests in place, and student demographic groups started performing better, and it was labeled the Texas Miracle. He went on to become president of the United States and authored the No Child Left Behind Act. And the goal of that was to increase student achievement in reading and math for poor and underserved populations. And as a result of that, most states have some form of high-stakes assessment, as thanks in part to Texas Miracle and our esteemed governor and late president of the United States, George W. Bush. That led to the Every Student Succeed Act, and it was really moved from federal solutions to local solutions and focused on the lowest 5% of performers. And it's a grant-based program for schools that aren't performing well. And as a result of that, 16 states in the District of Columbia now have automatic retention rules. So if you don't pass the state assessment, you get retained. Workman in 2014 also found that 63% of students didn't graduate from high school. They had third grade reading problems. That's a substantial number of students that had third grade reading problems. There's been all kinds of crazy assumptions about prison beds and third grade reading scores as a result of some of that work. Also in play is Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which required response to intervention, giving a student a reading benchmark screener at the beginning of the year to determine if they fall below the 20th percentile in a norm reference. And those are 3 tiers of instruction in response to those kinds of screeners. One is a general ed high fidelity research-based curriculum. Tier 2 is smaller settings for students that are showing difficulty in the screeners. And number 3 is individualized intensive interventions that occur prior to a student being referred for special education testing. That brings us on to the NAEP, or our Nation's Report Card as it's referred to, and that's the National Assessment of Educational Progress, which is a study across the 50 states to determine how we're doing in reading. And at the present time, 29% scored proficient or above in the state of Texas on the last reported assessment. On that same assessment, economically disadvantaged students performed at 18% proficiency compared to 46% with their peers. Black students performed 21% lower than their peers, and Hispanic students performed 25% lower than their peers. That brings us to the Texas State Literacy Plan. TEA and the University of Texas system got together and developed this Texas State Literacy Plan. And they invited educators, professors, local education agencies, education service centers, and universities, and the Texas Education Agency to provide members of the development board. And the goal of this was to develop the plan and increase reading instruction. They developed some what they called lasers, and those were leadership, assessment, standards-based instruction, effective instructional framework, reporting, accountability, and sustainability. The last legislative session also provided literacy academies that all K through 3 teachers and administrators must attend as a result of some of this work from the TSLP. There are some consequences for long-term reading difficulty. The Annie Casey Foundation 2012 found that 16% not at reading on grade level in third grade didn't graduate on time. That was a statistic that was 4 times greater than those who were proficient. Connie Jewell did a study in 1988, and she determined it was a longitudinal study of 54 children in the Austin Independent School District, and it was determined that reading difficulty in first grade equated to reading difficulty in fourth grade and beyond, and that 1/3 of poor economically disadvantaged students who didn't read on level in third grade didn't graduate. 1 in 3. That's 2 times more than students who are non-economically disadvantaged. There's also some linking between health outcomes and adult literacy. 15 million adults, 10% of the population, lack basic reading skills, according to Weiss et al. In 1992. And that was also 27% lack proficient reading skills such that they can participate in the economy of the United States. That's a statistically significant relationship between poor literacy skills and health outcomes in general, and also some linking between poor literacy skills and poor psychosocial health and mental health as well in that study by Weiss et al. There's also STAR test and readability issues, as pointed out by Sabato and Sinclair in 2019. They studied 3rd through 8th grade STAR passages. They ran those passages through multiple online readability tools, 8 to be specific, and they averaged the results. In 3rd grade, the results were 5.4 average, or almost halfway through 5th grade was the average reading level. In 4th grade, it was 5.9, almost 6th grade reading level. In 5th grade, it was 6.5 average, which is halfway through 6th grade. So the trouble with this is there aren't any formative assessments to really determine how do you get what you're getting and what level you're reading on based on this research by Sabato and Sinclair in 2019. So we need a tool like the Fontes-Pinnell Benchmark Assessment System to clearly correlate. Next up, there's no research base. Districts have adopted commercial assessments that have little research base, according to Shepard in 2010, and they don't conduct even the most basic of research. And teachers don't have tools that are predictive, according to Halverson in 2010. He specifically quotes, "The lack of close connection between assessment information and instruction practices make it difficult for teachers to interpret and use assessment results." So clearly we need some correlational studies between STAR and some kind of informal assessment. That brings us to the Fontes-Pinnell Benchmark Assessment System. It takes 20-30 minutes for a teacher to administer this. Student reads to that teacher. The teacher scores the reading on oral reading fluency rates, comprehension and accuracy rates, and also scores fluency on a rubric score of 0 to 6. And that gives a level that a student is reading on from A to Z, A to being a kindergarten level, Z to being an adult level in middle school. Our research design is a correlational study between the Fontes-Pinnell Benchmark Assessment System and STAR to solve some of these problems if there is a correlation. The population was Weatherford ISD, 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade students, 1,976 students, 2.2% were African American, 25.8% were Hispanic, 67.2% were white, 41.4% were economically disadvantaged, and they both had to take both assessments, both the benchmark assessment end of year and STAR end of year assessment as well. In summary, there's a complex accountability system out there in the state of Texas that is high stakes for teachers and students and parents and campuses and districts. And teachers need adequate tools to better predict how students are going to perform on those reading assessments. And students need assessments so that they can perform better to affect their life in positive ways. The sanctions are very real for teachers, educators, students, campuses, districts, and therefore we need a correlational study between the Fontes-Pinnell Benchmark Assessment System and the state of Texas Academic Assessment of Readiness so that teachers, students, school administrators, communities, districts, and ultimately every student in the state of Texas can have better results in reading, and so that their lives can be improved in various ways as detailed in this presentation.